Good afternoon, dear friends. You are on the channel Military Reporter, and we are still continuing to study the situation on the front. So, friends, today I want to discuss two things related to the situation in Kursk region, one positive and one negative. Let's start, perhaps, with the positive one. The positive thing is that the northern piece of the Kursk bridgehead of the Ukrainian armed forces is living out its last days, if not hours. You can see it yourself on the map. I told you yesterday that the final clearing of Gogolevka is underway. Plus there is fighting on the western outskirts of the village, which the Ukrainian armed forces were desperately trying to cling to. But they failed, and they eventually retreated, some to Oleshnya, and some tried to escape to Sumy region. I told you that since the fate of Gogolevka was decided and the village was returned back to Russia, it is logical that the territory to the north will also be cleared in the nearest future. And so it happened. This entire area of more than 20 km superscript 2 was cleared yesterday. Moreover, from Gogolevka itself our troops advanced to the west and came to the border, to the checkpoint. Thus, from the bridgehead of the armed forces of Ukraine in the northern part of the area of 13 km superscript 2, plus the village of Oleshnya. But there is already fighting for it at the moment, as I said yesterday. The Ukrainian armed forces do not have full control here. The village is a solid gray zone, although formally it is under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. In fact, there have already been attacks and attempts to enter the village, attempts to take it under full control. However, due to its location, and it is located right on the border, there is some kind of feeding. So the fighting here has been a little bit prolonged. By the way, yesterday I received an exclusive video from the guys from the front. You won't see it on any other channel. In general, the guys came under fire from the Ukrainian armed forces. Burnt, Bukhanka, there are 300s. In general, the very real realities of the front. In general, returning to the northern section of the Kursk front, I think that you, looking at the map, realize that everything has been decided here. A day, two at most, and this northern section will cease to exist. Only the southern section will remain. This is where we get to the negative news. It's very clear now, and I'll tell you all about it. So, let's move on to the section of the Kursk front, where, unfortunately, things are not so smooth. There is negative news, I would even say news, that is in the plural. There are two of them. The first one is that the Ukrainian armed forces have come to their senses here. But before, you yourself remember what the pace was. The Ukrainian armed forces simply fled, were completely disorganized in this area, especially in the area of the village of Gavo. Now they have managed to build a line of defense and are putting up a fierce resistance. Again, if you've watched my past issues, you'll recall that I told you about a similar scenario a few days ago. That Gavo is located favorably for defense, and the Ukrainian armed forces will most likely try to organize fortifications there. Nevertheless, this is what happened. But we have what we have. Moreover, the second negative news is that there are already reports that the Ukrainian armed forces are transferring new units here in an attempt to hold at least some of the Kursk region at all costs. This entire southern section is almost 35 km superscript 2. What will they gain by holding this small section with two villages? Perhaps Zelensky just wants to show, look, we still control territories in Kursk Oblast. However, this will not last long in any case. No matter how they resist here, no matter what reserves they try to bring in from the north, Oleshnya is already surrounded from three sides. And as soon as the situation there is completely resolved, the group involved in the operation will move on Gavo. Given that there is already fighting in the village, although only on the northern outskirts, I think they won't be able to hold their positions for long. I showed you yesterday that the water tower area was taken, plus the two northern streets. So, taking into account that fighting is already going on, and as soon as everything will be solved with Oleshnya and the group will move south, the Ukrainian armed forces will not be able to stay surrounded for long. Well, maybe they will be able to hold out here for another week, but no more. A few more words about Sumy region. Already there are reports about the complete capture of Basov. Among other things, I have seen such reports even in Ukrainian publics. Let's wait with you, of course, for video confirmation, so that everything is for sure. But if this is indeed true, then the Ukrainian armed forces have a huge problem here. Because from Basov the movement will immediately go to Okna, and as you can see on the map, it essentially merges with Yakovlevka. And Yakovlevka is already a major logistics center. The Ukrainian armed forces are now trying to drive reserves into the Kursk region, but very soon they will have to think about where to get reserves for defense in the Sumy region. It has only been a few days since the intense fighting near the village of Gavo, and the situation on the front has begun to develop rapidly. The armed forces of Ukraine, AFU, despite attempts to hold their positions, have begun to suffer serious losses. Russian troops continued their offensive from the north and south, gradually closing the encirclement around the remaining Ukrainian units in the Kursk region. As soon as the clearing operation in the Oleshny area was completed, the Russian group began advancing toward Gavo. At dawn, large units of the Russian army, reinforced by artillery and tank brigades, launched a massive assault on AFU positions. Aviation carried out a series of precision strikes on enemy fortifications, destroying firing points and ammunition depots. The AFU tried to resist, but under heavy artillery fire and constant pressure from assault groups, their positions began to crumble. By midday, Russian troops had reached the western outskirts of Gavo, forcing Ukrainian units to retreat south in panic. Attempts to organize a counterattack failed. Russian snipers and mortar crews kept all approaches under fire. By the evening of March 18th, Gavo was completely cleared. The last pockets of resistance were suppressed, and the surviving Ukrainian fighters either surrendered or tried to hide in nearby forests. Russian troops established full control over this section of the front. While the clearing operation in Gavo was underway, the Russian army launched an active offensive on Yakovlevka, a key logistical hub in the Sumy region. The AFU attempted to hold their positions using armored vehicles and mobilized reserves, but heavy artillery fire and massive drone strikes prevented them from organizing effective defense. At dawn on March 19th, a Russian assault group broke through AFU defenses on the northern outskirts of Yakovlevka and began advancing into the village. During street battles, Russian troops captured several ammunition depots and destroyed a large fortified area in the village center. The AFU tried to hold positions in administrative buildings, but constant artillery and mortar fire made this impossible. By noon, most of Yakovlevka was under Russian control. The remnants of the Ukrainian units began retreating south, abandoning equipment and weapons. Realizing that the situation on the front was rapidly deteriorating, the Ukrainian command attempted to deploy reserves from the Poltava region and other controlled territories in the Sumy region. However, Russian aviation and artillery launched a series of strikes on railway stations and vehicle convoys. According to intelligence reports, 2 convoys with reinforcements were destroyed on the approaches to Yakovlevka. The remaining AFU units, unable to quickly regroup, were forced to stop and look for alternative routes. This gave Russian troops additional time to strengthen their positions. By the evening of March 19th, Russian forces had completely secured Yakovlevka, forcing the remaining Ukrainian units to retreat toward Okna. Russia now controlled a major transportation hub through which the AFU had been receiving ammunition and reinforcements. After taking Yakovlevka, the Russian army began advancing toward Okna, the last major settlement in this section of the front. The AFU tried to organize a defense by pulling in the remaining armored vehicles and several motorized infantry units. However, Russian forces, using their tactical advantage, began shelling enemy positions from the flanks. Multiple launch rocket systems played a particularly significant role, which within a few hours practically burned out AFU fortifications on the approaches to Okna. By the morning of March 20th, Russian assault groups had broken through the defenses and started clearing the village. During fierce street battles, several armored personnel carriers and enemy strongholds were destroyed. By the evening, the remaining AFU units began a chaotic retreat, abandoning equipment and weapons. Some Ukrainian units attempted to take cover in basements and abandoned buildings, but Russian troops carried out a series of clearing operations, eliminating the last pockets of resistance. After fully securing Okna, Russian troops took an operational pause to regroup and replenish ammunition. Military engineers began setting up fortifications and minefields in case of potential counterattacks by the AFU. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian command found itself in a difficult situation. The loss of Yakovlevka and Okna meant the collapse of the entire defensive line in this sector of the front. The reserves that the AFU could have used for a counterattack were destroyed in the recent battles. Western media immediately began reporting on the catastrophic situation of the Ukrainian army in the Kursk and Sumy regions. American and British military analysts admitted that the AFU had effectively lost control of this section of the front and could face further territorial losses in the coming weeks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in an emergency address to the nation, called on the West to immediately increase arms supplies, stating that without additional military assistance, it would be impossible to hold the front line. Meanwhile, an emergency meeting of Russia's Security Council was held in Moscow to discuss further steps to consolidate gains on the front and potential conditions for negotiations with Ukraine. The Kremlin stated that Russia is ready for dialogue but only on its terms. The situation on the front remains tense. Russian troops continue to strengthen their positions and prepare for potential counterattacks by the AFU. The Ukrainian army is trying to stabilize the situation, but the loss of Yakovlevka and Okna has left the AFU without key logistical hubs, which could lead to further Russian advances into the Sumy region in the coming weeks. Active fighting on the southern section of the front is expected to continue in the coming days. Russian commanders are preparing a new offensive plan aimed at consolidating control over the entire Kursk region and further advancing into Ukraine. Well, that's all for now. I wish you a good working day. See you tomorrow.